Hello everybody, I want to welcome you all to this webinar on implementing inventory management best practices. My name is John Holtham. I'm hosting this webinar today for our Director of Sales, Alan Lessing. Assisting Alan is Praneeth Butler, who will be demonstrating various points within the software. We will spend about 40 minutes on the webinar, then come back to myself to open it up for any questions that you may have. So a couple of housekeeping items. On the GoToWebinar control panel, there is a download button where you can download a PDF copy of the presentation. Feel free to download it. There is a toolbar on the GoToWebinar control panel that includes a question box where you can type any questions as we go through the presentation. They will come to our attention immediately. At the end, we will have some wrap-up information for you so you can contact Alan directly to obtain more detailed information one-on-one. We're more than happy to do that. After the webinar, you will receive an email with a link to access a recording of this webinar so you can review it again if you wish, or forward it to anyone else in your organization who may not have been able to attend today. Thank you. I'll now hand over to Alan.
Well, good morning, good afternoon for all of those who've joined us. We appreciate your time. I'm Alan Lessing, Director of Sales for OptiPro. I'm going to walk through some information for you regarding inventory management best practices. Let's talk first a little bit about the challenges. Perhaps you recognize some of these occurrences within your company, and if you do, that's an indication that there's certainly some opportunities within your inventory management. Some symptoms you might recognize. Customer satisfaction is getting worse, or perhaps your manufacturing costs are continuing to rise. You're finding yourself with ghost inventory, so that is to say inventory that isn't there, or perhaps you're finding inventory that is there that you didn't think was there. Perhaps you're finding overstock, too much inventory, or even worse, understock. So you're experiencing shortages when you're attempting to ship or issue to work in process. Your accounting people are complaining that obsolescence reserves are increasing. So that means we now have inventory that we're having to write off because perhaps engineering is revisioning parts up, or perhaps engineering is changing bills of material. Perhaps you have very nervous manufacturing schedules. They're constantly changing because you attempt to start a particular work order or assembly only to find that there are parts short. So you have to build something else. And all of that is leading to increased expenses associated with these last-minute decisions. So if you look at it from a perspective, a guy out on the shop floor, he's getting ready to start an operation on a work order. He goes to his skid in front, and lo and behold, there's no material available for him. He calls his supervisor. His supervisor says, "Oh, go work on this." So the guy on the shop floor, he has to tear down his setup and start something else. The supervisor runs off to the stockroom to get a hold of the stockroom guy. "Are you sure you don't have this?" "Oh, let me look." So he drops what he's doing and he goes and searches around, comes back and says, "Oh, no, I can't find it." So one or both of them trot off to purchasing. "Hey, what can we do about this?" The purchasing guy drops whatever he's doing and starts to make phone calls. Maybe we're lucky. Maybe we can get it around the corner, or maybe we're not so lucky. The parts are coming in from a subcontractor and they're still on the machine. Instead of getting 40, hey, maybe I can expedite 5 of them in, right? So let's put them on a special truck or put them on a courier, or hey, let's go all the way. Let's put them on an airplane. All of these costs are reflected in your manufacturing costs and your overhead costs. Any of this look familiar to you? I suspect so. It's part of manufacturing. So Part of the key in understanding how to improve our inventory best practices is to actually understand where it is. A lot of companies have what they call four-wall inventory. So the answer is, do I have it? Yes, it's out there somewhere. Well, that's not quite good enough. We actually have to understand where all of our inventory is as it works its way through our manufacturing processes and back out the door. You can see here listed a bunch of internal locations where we should actually formally be able to see them. And then, of course, let's not forget about inventory that's actually outside of our building. So maybe we have inventory at vendors, or it's in transit, or perhaps it's out for a subcontract operation. Many organizations do subcontract operations, i.e. chrome plating or hardening, powder coating, but we tend to lose visibility of it when it leaves our building. So out of sight, out of mind, where is it? And some people also have warehouses out at a third-party logistics company. Very important in best inventory practices to understand where our inventory is exactly at all times in real time. So let's talk a little bit about understanding how do we optimize our inventory levels. First of all, you have to understand your demand. Where is my demand coming from? Is it coming from a service order? Is it coming from a work order? Is it coming from a direct ship? Is it coming from a sales guy who wanders in and swipes something out of inventory? Or perhaps I have inventory sitting with my service techs. You have to know how your demand flows through your entire supply chain. You know, we talked about, subcontract operations. We talk about work orders and so on. Also very, very important to understand what your key effectors are. If you don't understand what your key effectors are, then it's very, very difficult to control your inventory. This is all part of best practices. When I say effectors, I talk about things like inventory record accuracy. I talk about bill of material accuracy. I talk about work order and routing accuracy. The reason that these are very, very key is that these are the key components in inventory record accuracy. And deviations from perfection are multipliers in your ability to ship successfully. Just understand that if you have inventory record accuracy of 98%, which that's actually pretty good, if your BOM accuracy is less than 100%, let's call it 98. And let's talk about your routing accuracies. Let's call that 98. All of these numbers multiply by each other. 98 sounds pretty good. However, 2 times 2 times 2 is 8. With 98% across the board, you have an 8% chance of being in error. All of a sudden, this is a big number. So driving toward perfection is very, very important. Another way of optimizing inventory levels are your inventory strategies. So people use things like safety stocks. They use max and mins. Some people have advanced to the point that they're actually using consignment inventory. So that is to say, people are actually putting inventory on your shelves and you only pay for it when you use it. You can imagine the risk if your inventory best practices are out of control. Nobody's going to put his inventory on your shelves unless he understands that you're under control. Another way you can minimize your risk and decrease the amount of labor that you spend on your inventory record accuracy is something called vendor managed inventory. So that is to say your vendors are actually coming in and replenishing your inventories without you having to worry about it. So optimizing inventory levels, some opportunities for you. So another part of best practices is automation. How do we automate our practices and how do we automate our inventory movements? Well, number one is perpetual inventory. I used the word before, four-wall inventory. Four-wall inventories are typically not perpetual. Four-wall inventories are controlled by physical counts. We'll talk a little bit about physical count versus cycle counting a little bit later, but perpetual inventories are tied to tools within MRP that allow you to control your bills of material, your work orders, and picking and dispatching to WIP, taking work orders, back flushing your inventories, and then pushing them to back into finished goods. Another very important tool in automation of the inventory practices and bringing things back into line is to use an ERP system for cycle counting. And the best way to control cycle counting is the ABC method. So that is to say, A items have a very high cost value. They have long lead times, and a stock out could actually cause critical production disruptions. B items are your run-of-the-mill. They have an average, cost. The lead times aren't too onerous. And the C items are the fast movers. They're easy to get. They typically have a low cost. A items you count very frequently. B items a little less frequently, and C items even more or less frequently. The reason that we do cycle counting, and we do them as often as we can, is that we can count all of our critical items frequently, and at that point we have a chance to identify why we have an error in the count. You can see if you do a physical count once a year, right, and something happens in February, and I don't count my inventory until December, the chances of understanding what happened in February are nil. You'll never figure it out. If your counts are within, days or weeks of the error, you have a chance to identify why it went wrong, and you can go back and fix it. When you're fixing things, you're fixing your processes and you're driving up your inventory record accuracy. Those are best business practices. Other tools that people use to automate inventory processes, RFID, so radio frequency identification. Those are little tags, electronic tags that you put on the parts as you pass them through gantries. The system is capable of making transactions automatically. A further evolution of that is license plating. So that is where you're capable of, on a pallet, having multiple parts and multiple counts on that pallet. And again, by moving it through a gantry, you're able to count them and automate the transactions. EDI is a way of automating the inbounds and outbounds of your inventories and finished goods. And again, very important in putting all of this together is we're automating processes and taking out the chance of human error, whether that be, I can't read that scribble, or I transpose the numbers, whether it be a part number transposition or whether it be a quantity transposition error. That all leads to inventory record inaccuracies, and scans are real time. So rather than making up lists and somebody keep punching them 2 or 3 or 8 hours later, barcoding allows all of this to happen in real time. Perpetual inventories are relieved in real time as transactions take place throughout the organization. So, inventory record accuracy, what do we get out of that? Well, let's talk about the cycle counts versus physical counts. Physical count, that is an accounting function, really does nothing for inventory record accuracy. We really should do cycle counting and increase the frequency and get to the root cause analysis. What happens when we do that? Fewer stockouts. We don't have just-in-case inventory. So that's a bubble in inventory to cover the inaccuracies that we have in our business processes. We accelerate the inventory through the organization, through your manufacturing processes, and thereby reducing the inventory. We lower inventory risk. So that goes back to, we talked about engineering changes, whether that be bill of material changes or revisioning of parts. We reduce our inventory shrinkages. So that is to say, with increased record accuracy, we don't fluctuate the dollars in the same manner. We get less shrinkage. So lower inventory with better fill rates, right? So we increase the throughput of our inventory. And then there's the collateral process improvements. We talked about, the operator on the machine getting disrupted because he doesn't have the part. We get the nervous production schedule. We had the inventory guys running around checking for this and checking for that because they couldn't find it on the first pick. The purchasing guy isn't continuously disrupted by stockouts and so on. Those are all process improvements that we get from inventory record accuracy. So that being said, we're going to show you something with OptiPro. This is an ERP solution that we have for you. We're going to show these inventory best practices in our solution, and I'm going to turn things over to Praneeth. I hope you see something that you like, see something that you can implement, and certainly I'd love to talk more about how we can help you with your practices as well as our solution, OptiPro. I turn it over to you, Praneeth.
Thank you, Alan. Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. I'm Praneeth Putlur. Okay, for next few minutes, we'll look into various inventory management tools in OptiPro software. As Alan mentioned, we're going to talk about the inventory values in the system. And then we're going to talk about the turn ratios for different items and product groups. And then we'll focus on maintaining min and max inventory levels, how we can optimize the inventory using reorder points and using MRP. And then we'll also look into available to promise, where we can actually provide an accurate date for the customer when we are taking an order. And then we'll focus on also shipping scheduling management, where we can focus on allocating inventory from one order to another order. And then lastly, we'll talk about forecasting tools available to better manage inventory. And then and also, to increase the inventory record accuracy, we'll focus on inventory counting. Okay. So first, let's look into inventory value that we have for total inventory. So I'm actually logged into the software. So you can actually look into the inventory value, as you can see here. The total inventory value is 38 million, and you can see the inbound value. So these are KPIs available. So you can actually look at the inbound and outbound values. And also you can actually run reports. Basically, for example, inventory audit report, where you can actually run and analyze, what's the total value of inventory you may have, and then you can do by location. Once you actually run the report, you would be able to see, total items on hand and how you can actually start the projections. Maybe you want to, do a sale and run a promotions to increase this inventory. So you can see the value and you can see the quantities and so on. Okay. Second, so this way you can maintain, the inventory values and turn around the inventory. And the second item here, which is noticeable item, is nothing but inventory turnover. So system actually provides a good KPIs. So you can actually look at the total turn ratios this year, and then you can also look at other, inventory KPIs by date range in a graph. And you can see the turn ratios by group, which group is doing better or faster. So you can analyze the turn ratios and accordingly take action. So for example, this group is actually running at 4.30. Probably it's a slow moving item. So you can actually try to come up with the ways to better manage inventory and push it. The other way to look at is using inventory turnover by warehouse. So let's assume you have a multiple locations, and you can actually look at turn ratios by location and see which one is doing better and actually optimize inventory levels. And we also have a few dashboards where you can actually run, by item cost, by different analysis, and you can also further explore, the class ABC items as Alan was talking about. So for instance, if you can analyze the inventory by items, by group, and you can actually explore and double click on and the graphs to open up the details about the items and what the turn ratios, and actually plan accordingly. Okay, so these are nothing but turn ratios that will allow to actually maintain the inventory levels better. The other one of the other points is actually is a slow moving items. So let's say, for example, there might be inventory sitting on the shelves, and we wanted to find out what are the items that have been sitting there for a long time. So you can actually look at inactive items report, where you can see the list of all items that has stock in a warehouse, but we haven't been able to sell it. So these are the items that we have to focus on selling to better manage inventory, and so on. Okay. And the other item is actually also maintaining the min and max levels. So if you take a look at an item master data, you can actually define minimum inventory and a maximum inventory for any given item, and also a reorder point. So these are key inputs for managing inventory. So system actually can suggest you with an alert for the user, or basically when you do an MRP run, system is also watching the reorder points and will not exceed to order more, so you can better manage inventory, so you don't over order and then have excess on the inventory. So these are key inputs, and there's different ways how you can actually use this. So you also have built-in alerts. So whenever the system actually deviates from stock, system would automatically get an alert notifying the procurement maybe it's time to buy. Okay, so these are different strategies available. And next, we'll actually look into availability check. So this base, let's say, for example, you have a customer that just called in and would like to place an order for one of the items, and he wants to know when we can ship it. So for instance, we open a sales order. Let's say our favorite customer, let's say Microchips, is wants to order a JBC printer. Let's say he wants to 10 units, and we wanted to, let's say he wants to ship on August 2nd. Okay, so when you actually enter the date, so when you actually add, system is actually doing an availability check. Basically, it's looking up all the list of open sales orders and production orders, and actually recommending when we can ship it. So based on what we have requested, it looks like we don't have anything available, but you can actually do an availability check or display the ATP report, where system can show the detailed transactions and when you can see inventory becomes positive, and then you can actually promise the customer. Okay. Or on the other hand, you can also use an alternative items. So for example, let's say we don't have this item in stock, you probably can actually run alternative items report and actually suggest customer that, okay, this item is probably the closest one and with similar match factor, so you can actually upsell those items as well. Okay, so for now, let's say we're going to continue with this one, and we'll talk about how we can fulfill this order. So we're going to add the transaction. So now let's say we're going to get back to the customer and we want to fulfill this order, let's say as soon as possible. So you can actually take a look at our shipping management feature. Let's say we're focusing on item, the item we're working on. So let's take a look at the item. So system actually will display all the open sales orders, and you can see the unconfirmed quantity just because we don't have enough inventory. So let's say I'm going to ship this to customer. So you can actually drag and drop to the top, and then you can actually deallocate inventory from these, like, or any of these sales orders. So for example, I can click on it and say let's decrease inventory. So the moment I decrease here, you can see on the top, you can see the change. So I'm going to let's say I'm going to make it available like 10, for instance, okay, and then you can preview, and system would automatically deallocate the inventory from the sales order I have chosen, and then updates, and you can confirm. Okay, so system, you can actually update, and then you can actually promise the customer by deallocating and allocating the stocks. Okay, so these are tools, for allow you to better manage, shipping scheduling and promise the customers during the sales process. Okay, the next item we're going to talk about is the forecasting tools. So let's say you are a procurement manager and you want to forecast for next season. So you typically actually create a forecast for next quarter. So for example, I'm going to create one. Let's say 2018. So we're going to create a forecast, and so you can actually use different forecasting algorithms available. So for instance, let's say I'm going to pick a bunch of items. You can select a few items, and then I'm going to click forecast. So system is actually looking at the history and generating the forecast. So by default, we use triple exponential smoothing, but you have different algorithms. You have also linear regression. So it's a different algorithm how the system calculates the inventory levels. So system actually generates in a graphical mode. So you can actually so these are like spikes, which does not represent data, but for example, you might have sold a good inventory, so you can actually hold it, and then let's say click on it, and then drag the spikes. So system updates the inventory. So you can actually update the spikes, and then you can actually let's say you wanted to only consider the inventory for last 1 year. So you can actually drag the graph up to here, and system automatically dynamically updates the inventory and the forecast for this quarter, and you can actually create a forecast. So as you can see here, so the system actually uses different algorithms to generate a forecast for your MRP runs. Okay, so this way you can actually plan for the inventory, so you don't have to run out or run into negatives. Okay, I'm going to add this. So this is one of the tools that allow to maintain inventory at all times using the seasonal demand and so on. So finally, we'll talk about inventory counting, which is one of the effective ways to maintain inventory record accuracy. So for that, you basically can actually define inventory cycles. So for instance, as Alan was talking about, you can actually define class A, class B, categories, and you can define how often you want to count. Let's say class A is weekly, and then class B is monthly, and so on. So once you define actually the inventory cycles, system is actually going to recommend the cycle counting recommendations. So you can actually just select a warehouse or one or more warehouses and basically display the data. So from here you can actually start basically counting process. So for instance, I can go to counting, and you can actually take a look at it and then look at the item, and then you can actually start, okay, I've counted, now it's going to say 2, and we're going to add the transaction. So adding a counting transaction will actually increase the accuracy of the record. So you can actually do multiple countings as well here. So you have multiple counters, and system can actually suggest what's the right one, and then accounting later on will use this transaction to actually confirm the inventory adjustment. Okay, so there are different ways you can actually do this manually. The system is smart enough to actually also the alert based on your setup. For instance, if you take a look at an example here, system would also alert, and then depending upon the cycle recommendation due date, and you can actually pick the item from here and do inventory counting. Okay, so by following these inventory management tools, you can actually better maintain inventory levels, so you don't run into out of inventory or negatives. Thank you. I'll turn over things to Alan.
Okay, thank you very much, Praneeth. I hope everybody can hear me. Now, I think Praneeth has shown you some very valuable tools in the OptiProERP solution. Now let's talk about what do we expect? Well, Peter Drucker said, if you can't measure it, you can't improve it. So we better have some tools to understand that we're successful in our best practices for inventory record accuracy. Certainly, measuring inventory record accuracy, getting it north of 98% is an absolute must. And cycle counting diligently is the way to get there. You can look at your inventory effectiveness by looking at its turnover. So we call those turns. From a North American perspective, typical manufacturing company in North America right now is turning their inventory about 9 times a year. So inventory turns being measured as cost of goods sold divided by your inventory value. Now that being said, 9 sounds good, but as an international measure, for example, we have Far Eastern companies that are actually turning their inventory 26 times. So that is to say they are moving their inventory every 2 weeks. You can imagine the effectiveness of that. This is where we have to go. Certainly, as Praneeth showed, we have the ability to measure our slow-moving inventory, and by measuring it, we can reduce it. We have to understand what the real levels of safety stock should be and what our minimum inventory values should be. It should not be just in case inventory. Safety stocks and minimum values have to reflect true calculations on the criticality of the items in safety stock and how fast we can bring in new items to put into the inventory and reduce the minimum values. We want both of those numbers to go down in terms of dollars continuously. Certainly we should be measuring our stockouts. How many times a day are we actually hitting a stockout? We should be eliminating that. And we should be looking at our fill rates. You know, what's the percentage of 100% fill on all of our picks for work orders, as well as for our finished goods out the door to our customers. Very important that we measure things. So with that, I think we should. We focused very much on inventory best practices. You've seen in OptiPro a very strong tool that can enable your inventory best practices. OptiPro, as a company, we are focused solely on manufacturing. It is our DNA, manufacturing and its associated distribution. We are a global company. You can see we're spread around the world, so we can certainly support you anywhere. Headquartered in California, and you can see our larger offices in Mexico City and in India. We do offer 24-hour support 5 days a week. We can go 7/24. We are a global team. We are a large team. We are specialists in manufacturing. It is what we do. It's our DNA. Our owner is an engineer. We actually have tool and die makers on staff, people who have PMIs. It's all about manufacturing. We deliver end-to-end solutions for you. Don't want to sell too much, but I think it's important that you know who we are. At this point, I will turn things over to John Holtham, who is our moderator. I can imagine there are some questions out there. So, John, if you want to field some questions, I'll turn things back to you.
Thanks, Alan. Questions, there are some questions that come in, and while I'm doing these, anybody else who has one, hop onto that little question box and type your question in. If you do have a microphone or a telephone, you can click the hand icon and I can unmute you to answer a question if you'd prefer it that way. The first question I have here, Alan, is can we freeze inventory during counting?
Yes, with the OptiPro solution, you can. Certainly, many solutions cause you to freeze it, but no, you can have dynamic inventory during your cycle counts, which is actually very important because, hey, companies don't want to shut down their operations just because they're doing cycle counts. We still want to ship product out the door as much as we want inventory record accuracy through cycle counting. It should not disrupt our value add process. So yes, we can freeze it during counts.
Thanks, Alan. The second question I have here is, does MRP look at those minimum and maximum quantities that Praneeth showed?
Yes, absolutely. That's critical to have MRP looking at those insofar as MRP has to understand when an inventory value falls below the minimum so that you can trigger a requisition to purchasing to bring that level back up above the minimum, but certainly not exceed the maximum. So yes, you have to look at those values during your MRP runs. Okay.
Next question I have is, do you have any approval process for inventory adjustments?
Oh, absolutely. I think our finance people would have a fit if we could just willy-nilly adjust the inventory values, understanding that in doing that, we are actually playing around with our assets. So yes, all inventory value changes, count changes have to be under authorizations and permissions, and as you could expect, OptiPro has those full controls, as well as notifications on triggers and alerts when things do move, because certainly a count could actually drive a stock below minimum and therefore triggering off a requirement to purchase.
Okay, and the last one that I have here at the moment is, what is the best way to establish ABC classifications? Are there reports to do that?
Yes, within the OptiPro solution, absolutely. Praneeth was showing you how we can categorize by ABC. Certainly, you can look at organizations like APIX, who will give you the classic definitions of ABC. We talked very briefly about it during my previous conversation. The fact of the matter is that most companies actually tailor ABC simply because their concepts of high value items change. Certainly, there's individual flavors of what is a critical part. So I would follow the APIX definitions, but understand that you really should be tailoring them to your organization. And certainly you saw that OptiPro is supporting that.
Thanks, Alan. We have one question on the phone. Alan, go ahead with your question.
Yes, my question was, I wanted to know if your program also offers the production scheduling as well, or is that just mainly inventory management?
Glad you asked that question. Yeah, no, the OptiPro ERP solution is fully end-to-end, right? So we're talking all the way from your sales activities all the way through production planning, manufacturing execution, purchasing, finance, out the door, including service management. Yes, there's full production management. We have production scheduling. We have production forecasting. We have advanced planning and scheduling with graphical planner boards, drag and drop on work orders across work centers and so on. Yes, we have very sophisticated manufacturing tools for you.
So next question I have is that do we have to, like, if we wanted, let's say if a company would like to purchase this and actually, like, they're currently having some kind of a program that it's coming short and they would like to upgrade it to, let's say, your program. How does the transfer side of that work? Like, do you guys, does it have to, like, if they have a particular database, does your program have to be fully set up from scratch, or can that database be incorporated? How does that part of it? Who would be able to answer that part of it?
Okay, very large question. I'll try to be as succinct as I can. OptiPro is an end-to-end solution, so it does cover all of the functionalities that a manufacturing company does require. Certainly, we have the ability to take a database, another ERP system's data, and migrate that into our solution. Certainly we can map solution to solution. We're a little purist in our approach insofar as we see ERP implementations as being an improvement opportunity for companies, and certainly one of those improvement opportunities is the accuracy of your data. We actually encourage people to use data migration through our data migration tools. We have proven templates that can move your data, from a legacy solution into OptiProERP. They're proven, and it's single button click. But certainly I would scrub the data, clean the data, before moving into your new ERP.
Okay.
Does that answer your question?
Thank you very much. Yes, thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
John. Any other questions, please? Okay, that looks like it. So thank you all very much for attending today. As I said earlier, the recording link will be sent to you in a follow-up email. I thank you for attending, and goodbye, everybody.